Welcome to the Hockey Writers Fantasy Forecheck, where we talk to you about all things fantasy, keeper league, redraft, and dynasty. We're going to give you hot players to pick up, prospects on the rise, and sleepers you should or shouldn't think of acquiring, and prospects who are looking to break out at the NHL level. I'm your host, Caleb Kerney.
And I am Jacob Strozyk.
And today we are going through our Atlantic Division recap. Jacob and I will go back and forth and give our best fantasy performer and our biggest fantasy surprise for each team in this division. So, Jacob, why don't you kick us off with the President's Trophy winning Boston Bruins?
Yeah, for me, it was a no-brainer as far as who was the best performer, and that's David Pastrnak. 61 goals. You don't often see 60 goal scorers in the NHL these days, but the way that he was playing all year, he was just supremely dominant. 61 goals, 52 assists. He was a plus 34 and some ridiculous, unheard of number, 407 shots. And he played all 82 games. So fantasy owners had to have been just raving in the streets, considering Pasternak's average draft position, from what I saw, was around 8th to 9th overall. So that's an absolute steal for something like that.
100%. And like the only person with more goals this year, Connor McDavid, of course.
Who's that?
It's tough to beat the GOAT. He had 63 or 64 goals. So, you know, it happens, but still, fantastic season from Pastrnak, my best fantasy performer from Boston. Gonna have to give it to Linus Ullmark. I mean, 49 games played, 40 wins. That is crazy. Only had 6 losses. He had 2 shutouts, 1.89 goals against average, a 938 save percentage. This is just insane numbers. If you had Allmark, if you were in a category league that took into consideration rate stats, he was a solid performer for you. If you're in a points league or just a general sort of category league that just had maybe wins and saves and that sort of a thing, he just did well across the board for you. So Linus Ullmark is my pick. Jacob, who's your biggest surprise from Boston?
For me, Jake DeBrusk. He had 64 games played, and he still threw up 50 points. He had 27 goals, and it was also a plus 26. He really broke out and finally started coming into his own as he's approaching his prime here. So being on the Bruins definitely helped, but he still had enough in himself to be productive despite some injury trouble throughout the year.
Absolutely. That's a great pick. My pick, sort of at the other end of the spectrum, the biggest disappointing surprise for me, Taylor Hall, 61 games played, only 16 goals and 20 assists for 36 points. And it's just not really going to cut it with forward. I mean, his shots were okay, 150 shots, 35 hits. It's kind of meh. 15 minutes and 56, seconds time on ice. 2 minutes and 14 seconds power play time on ice. That ice time is like the lowest ice time of his career since like his rookie. I think even in his rookie season, he was already, in the 16-minute mark. And last year, 16 and a half minutes and almost 3 minutes of power play time. So, he had the decreased role. He's probably happy that he's just on a winning team. But Taylor Hall is kind of more of a depth option, I would say, as far as fantasy goes going forward. He's starting to get up there in age. I don't know if we're ever going to see a big season from him again. Jacob, you have any quick thoughts on Hall?
And I'm kind of in the same boat. He even said when he got traded to Boston, when he's signed there, he was like, yeah, I'm not looking to be the guy. I'm just looking to be one of the guys. And that's what he was this year. He was just one of the guys. He's not going to be that 70, 80-point player anymore. He's just going to be a good depth option. So don't be picking him high next year. That's for sure.
Definitely not. As far as Boston goes, I'd probably pick Tyler Bertuzzi higher than I'd pick Hall. He's younger.
Definitely agree.
He'd probably get a chance, in the top 6. Hall looks like he's probably just going to be a third liner.
Bertuzzi's a better all-around fantasy option too.
And Bertuzzi, exactly. So, and just to quickly correct myself, in Taylor Hall's rookie season, he averaged 18 minutes and 13 seconds of time on ice. So this is the lowest of his career by far, beating out his next lowest, which was last year, of 16 minutes and 25 seconds time on ice averaged per game. Moving on quickly to, the mecca of all hockey, Toronto, or at least they'd like to think so. Best fantasy performer, I'll go first with Toronto. For me, it was John Tavares. He gave you coverage across the board in 80 games played, 36 goals, 44 assists for 80 points, 277 shots on goal, 112 hits. That's some great coverage. If you're in a category league, he brought the hits, he brought the shots, he gave you points. You're in a points league, beautiful baseline of the shots and the hits to go along with the goals and the assists. About 3.5 minutes of average, power play time on ice and 17 minutes and 39 seconds of average time on ice per game. Tavares was fantastic. Jacob, who caught your eye with Toronto?
Yeah, I was initially going to say Matthews, but honestly, he had a bit of a down year comparative to some of his other ones. Granted, you look at somebody who scores 40 goals and you go, oh, 40 goals is a down year? Yeah, for Matthews it is. So I went with one of his best friends, Mitch Marner. Guy had 30 goals, just racked up points all year long. He's one of the best playmakers in the league, so you can constantly rely on him to get you in the assist column. He doesn't get a lot of shots. He had under 200 shots. He doesn't really throw hits, so you're not getting much out of that. But it was his consistency with his scoring all year that, in my opinion, makes him their best fantasy performer. Because pretty much game in, game out, you're getting 1, maybe 2 assists. And then he's going to throw in a goal here and there. 30 goals is no joke. So you still got plenty of offensive production out of him. And I think he was slightly better than Matthews just from a performance standpoint in fantasy.
100%. Every time I was checking out Toronto box scores and I was looking at who was getting points, it seemed like every night Marner had at least a goal or an assist. That consistency, you want that, especially with your team. It's really nice to have those consistent guys on your fantasy team that you can rely on to balance out those streaky players who get their points in spurts and then have, ice cold weeks that potentially hurt you. So good to have those guys to sort of balance you out. My biggest surprise in Toronto this year has to be Willie Nylander. I mean, what happened to this guy this year? 82 games played, 40 goals, 47 assists for 87 points, 293 shots on goal, only 18 hits. Beat out Tavares for average ice time, 18.5 minutes per game, 3 minutes and 35 seconds of power play time on ice per game. This guy just went nuts this year. 40 goals is no joke. He was no slouch this year. He definitely pulled his weight around and, made up for the lack of scoring that Matthews could have had. Looking at his career high in goals, career high in assists, and like his shots on goal per game, he raised that up 3.5 shots on goal per game, basically. The peripherals could be better, but what more do you want from a guy? Jacob, who surprised you the most out of Toronto?
Yeah, for Toronto, on the disappointing end for me was defenseman Morgan Riley. He just didn't seem to have it in him a lot of times this year, and he wasn't putting up the offensive numbers that he's capable of. He has a 20-goal season under his belt back from 2018-19. Last year, he had 68 points. I mean, he still put up 41 points in 65 games this year, but it's the first time in 5 ish, about 6 years, that he was also a minus in his plus minus category. He was a -9. So defensively, he wasn't up to snuff compared to what his normal numbers are. He also only had 4 goals. So Riley is normally a good, two-way option as far as fantasy goes. He'll get you shots, he'll get you some blocks, and he'll get you points going into, your offensive categories as well. And he just didn't have it this year.
Yeah, that's too bad about Morgan Riley. What a shame. What a shame for Toronto. We'll see how they fare in their first round matchup, and let's talk about their first round matchup. Tampa Bay Lightning. Jacob, who do you got for their best fantasy performer this year?
For me, it's Braden Point. It's his first 50-goal campaign that he had. He had 51 goals, and he's one of only a handful of 50-plus goal scorers in the NHL this year. He had 95 total points, 20 power play goals. That is insane. 20 power play goals, and that is immense fantasy value to go with it. He was the top center for pretty much the entire year in Tampa Bay, and he's solidified himself as, I would say, their second best forward that they have, because it's hard to argue who their best one is.
100%, and I got their best forward. Talking today, Nikita Kucherov. I mean, had a great season in 82 games, 30 goals, 83 assists per game. Love to see it. Yeah, similar kind of stat line to Marner. He borders on that assist per game, and then 30 goals basically. 113 points, just fantastic. 271 shots on goal, 61 hits. Beautiful, love it. 20 minutes and 8 seconds of average time on ice per game, 4 minutes of power play time on ice per game. He finished the season with 49 power play points. He was 1 point shy of having as many power play points, pardon me, as Braden Point had goals through the entire season. That is crazy. That is absolutely insane. So, fantastic performance from Kucherov this year. I mean, he's only a couple years removed from winning the Art Ross. He's still got it, 29 years old. He's going to be good for a couple more years. Jacob, who surprised you the most from the Lightning this year?
Probably one of the best overall fantasy value players, in my opinion, for this year, and it was Brandon Hagel. 30-goal campaign, 64 points. He was a plus 23. And for a guy that Tampa got as basically a bolstering depth forward move, he really jumped up into their top 6, and he hit the ground running. He got plenty of power play time. He got a lot of opportunities to score, and he was playing with some really good players. And for where he would have gotten picked, which is the low rounds of any fantasy draft, there's just some incredible value for a player like him. And I didn't think he would throw up 30 goals. I figured he'd be a perennial 22 to 25 goal scorer. So 30 and then 64 points to go with it. I think it was just some incredible value out of him this year.
100%. Hagel was a great value pick in your fantasy leagues this year. I thought of either going with Point or Hagel for my biggest surprise, but I'm going to have to give it to Mikhail Sergachev. I mean, Hedman kind of struggled in some areas with some injuries and just some performance early in the season, and Sergachev really stepped up to the plate and really took on a bigger role. 79 games played this year, 10 goals, 54 assists, 64 points. That's fantastic. 156 shots, 128 hits. He averaged 23 minutes and 49 seconds of time on ice per game, 2.5 minutes of power play time on ice per game, and 27 power play points for the season. And he just was a beast this year. He's still super young, 24 years old. I mean, he basically he tied his career high for goals. He had 10 in 2019, 2020. Career high in assists. His points per game was 0.81. Before this year, his highest was 0.54. Power play points, he blew the record of his out of the water. He had 16 power play points in 2017 and 18 season. 149 blocks, so blocking a lot, shooting a lot more than he usually has, 2 shots a game, hitting a little less, but still sort of in that range. But, career highs in power play time on ice per game and career highs in time on ice per game. Love to see it. Moving right along to the Florida Panthers. For me, their biggest fantasy performer, and there's the obvious picks, but this one stands out to me, is Carter Verhaeghe. Set a career high in goals for himself with 42 goals, 31 assists for 73 points in 81 games. The former Tampa Bay Lightning player had himself a good season. 275 shots, 29 hits. He was fantastic this year. I mean, obviously not as good as the guy that Jacob has on deck here, but Verhaeghe, 2 minutes and 13 seconds of power play time on ice per game, 17 minutes and 30 seconds of time on ice per game. Only 13 power play points, which for him is a career high, but you'd love to see him get a chance on that top unit and really try and elevate his point totals next year. So he's my pick. Jacob, who's the best guy in Florida this year?
Yeah, to me, it's without question, it's the 100-point man, Matthew Tkachuk. He does it all. He's arguably just one of the best overall fantasy options in the game right now. He scores goals. He scores points. He throws hits. He had 36 power play points this year. And he just has this way about him that he plays the game. He also racks up penalty minutes. So if those get you points or get you categories in any way. So he does that little bit of everything, and he's still offensively productive. It's kind of like how Brad Marchand was in the past handful of years, and he's kind of evolving into that type of an option. So to me, best fantasy option just overall for or from Florida is Tkachuk. I think that's just a no-brainer for me personally.
Yeah, Tkachuk. I was trying to pick something a little bit off the board a little bit because I thought Tkachuk was a pretty easy guy to take a look at as far as a good season goes. Bad season, on the other hand, my biggest surprise got to be Aaron Ekblad. I mean, only 38 points in 71 games, still got you 14 goals, which you'll love to see from a defenseman. Only 24 assists, 216 shots, 77 hits. It's not bad peripherals. 23 and a half minutes of time on ice per game, just under 3.5 minutes of power play time on ice per game, 19 power play points. It wasn't a terrible season, but I mean, 38 points. Like the last time he had points that low, he played a lot less. Last year, he had 57 points in 61 games. And he was almost a point per game. His shots were up this year, which is great. His blocks were kind of back up this year, which is also great. But with Ekblad, I mean, the injuries, that's my big concern. If you're an Ekblad owner, is the injuries. He has played full seasons before. Looks like he's played 3 in his career. And he's been around for...
He was first overall in 2014, so almost 10 years.
Been around for 9 seasons. This is his 9th season. So it's fine. He's kind of like Chychrun in that sort of sense where he's probably going to get injured. And when he does, hopefully he's not your number 1 guy in your fantasy team. Hopefully he's maybe a 2 or a 3. But if you have Ekblad, you probably have him as your number one. You probably don't have him as a 2 or 3, but yeah, just that, he still has the goals, but it's the injury. So it's the inconsistency of play. And, looking at his career stats, he's gotten at least 10 goals in every single season he's played, except for the 2019-2020 season. He only had 5 goals, but he had 36 assists for 41 points, and he still had more points that season than he did this year. That's my guy. Jacob, who's your most disappointing from Florida this year?
Well, I don't have a disappointing pick. I have disappointing picks, but this for me is the biggest surprise. Speaking of number one defenseman, we're going to talk about Brandon Montour. The dude just threw up ridiculous numbers after, a bunch of average seasons, and he had 73 points as a defenseman. He pretty much was their top defenseman all year, whether it was Ekblad is out or just a regular games getting played. He really proved that he has the offensive and defensive capabilities of a number one defenseman. He had 33 power play points. He got a good amount of blocks and hits, 92 blocks, 92 hits. So he plays physical and he knows how to play D. He was probably one of the best value players that was not picked up on until after about the first month. I know because I picked him up and he was just absolutely dominating for me all year. And it was one of the greatest things that I had to replace Ekblad, who I also had. So, Montour, I don't know if he can replicate 73 points next year, but I think it's safe to say that he could consistently put up, I would say, about 60, maybe 65 points on that Florida team because they are offensively inclined. I'm not saying he can't hit the 73 again. I'm just not sure if he's going to consistently be at that 70-point mark as a defenseman.
Yeah, I think that expectation isn't reasonable to have in the case of Montour. He's not at the end of his career by any stretch of the imagination. He's 29 years old, so he's kind of at the end of his prime. So this might be the best season he ever has, but the drop-off, I think, is going to be minimal next year. And, 33 power play points he had this year, which is crazy. He hasn't had a lot of power play time on ice in his career. 4 minutes and 17 seconds of average power play time on ice this year shatters his next career high of 2 minutes and 15 seconds. So he was the guy replacing Ekblad, and his time on ice shot up 24 minutes average time on ice. His career high previous to that was the season that he split between Anaheim and Buffalo, 22 and a half minutes time on ice per game. The hits were there, kind of, he gets about a hit a game. Sometimes it's a little less than a hit per game. Sometimes it's a little more. The blocks, he's getting about a block per game. The shots really rocketed up this year. He's kind of hovered around the 2 shots per game through his entire career, except for this year where he was shooting 3 shots per game, and his shooting percentage was only 6.6%. So the goals, I would say, are pretty sustainable. His career average shooting percentage is 6%. So he's right in that range you like to see. As long as he keeps shooting, he's going to produce. We could see Montour, I think, take over the power play from Ekblad going forward, and Ekblad will kind of be the even strength producer. Moving on, I'll let you talk about your first guy on your team, Buffalo Sabres. Who is the best fantasy performer for Buffalo this year? Jacob, tell me.
Well, I'd say it's split between 2 players just because of how well they were, but I'm going to talk about the one I think didn't get as much recognition as he deserves, so I'm going to talk about it. It's going to be Rasmus Dahlin. He definitely got overshadowed a little bit by some other players as far as their point production goes, but for me, he set career highs in every category that he had in his up to this point. This year, he had 15 goals. He had 32 power play points. He had 105 hits, 132 blocks. He established himself as an all-around defenseman this year and arguably is one of the best fantasy defensemen. And from what I saw and what I noticed in a handful of leagues, he was listed as number 1, number 2, or number 3 in most fantasy leagues as far as production goes in just about everything. So if you were a believer in Dahlin a couple of years ago and you held on to him in some deeper leagues, you are reaping some rewards. If you picked him, kind of mid-early rounds, you are cheering in the streets right now. And if you're thinking about dropping him, you're insane. Just hold on to him. It doesn't matter that he's on Buffalo. People still have this negative connotation about Buffalo, and I understand that they missed the playoffs again, but Buffalo this year was one of the most offensive teams in the league, and Dahlin was a spearhead of that.
100%. 100%. Dahlin just hit another level this year, and another guy who hit another level this year, Tage Thompson. I mean, let's give it up for Tage. 47 goals and 47 assists for 94 points in 78 games played, 295 shots on goal, 55 hits, just gave you coverage across the board, 18 and a half minutes of time on ice per game, 3 minutes and 21 seconds of power play time on ice per game, average 3.8 shots on goal per game. Love to see it. 34 power play points, 15.8 shooting percentage. His career shooting percentage, 12.7. But last year he hit 15%. Okay. And last year he took 253 shots on goal per game, played the same amount of games. Okay. So he averaged 3.2 shots on goal per game. Love it. Love it. This guy just hit another level this year. Last year he only got 68 points, 30 goals, 38 assists. So new career highs across the board. You got to love Tage. He's really coming into his own. 301 games played in his career. He is also only 25 years old. The future is bright in Buffalo. Jacob, who is your surprising performer from Buffalo this year?
There was a couple of people I would have picked, but I eventually wound my way around to Big Jeff Skinner. This year was just a career year all around. He didn't beat his career high in goals, but he still had 35. So, he's still putting the puck in the back of the net like he's supposed to. But in 79 games played, he had 82 points. It's the first time in his career that he was over a point a game. His playmaking was incredible all season. He had some of the most beautiful passes sometimes to his teammates, and he was a vital piece of that top line that Buffalo had that mostly featured Tage, Tuck, and himself. And he was just consistent all year. So if you had Jeff and you were still thinking he's Ralph Kruger's Jeff Skinner, then you're kidding yourself, because Jeff just continues to laugh at the face of Ralph Kruger for putting him on the fourth line on that one season. Because since then, he's bounced back and been one of the Sabres' best overall scorers, and he's become one of the best fantasy options for anybody who might be underestimating him a little bit, because he puts the puck in the back of the net and he gets a lot of shots, and now he's getting a handful of assists to go with it. So he's a bit of a sleeper, in my opinion, going into next year.
Oh, yeah. I figured he was going to have a good year. I picked him up in a league that I was in. He didn't disappoint. One guy from Buffalo who didn't disappoint me, Dylan Cousins, had a breakout season in 81 games played, 31 goals, 37 assists for 68 points, 211 shots, 55 hits, 16 and a half minutes of time on ice per game, 2 minutes and 48 seconds of power play time on ice per game. Was just fantastic for Buffalo this year. Really came into his own in the second half of the season. Played fantastic, and like I just said, the future is pretty bright in Buffalo with all these young guys they got coming up, their prospects that are coming up. they're going to be a team to watch in the next couple of years to really make the playoffs. And the one team that was hoping to make the playoffs and, made a big acquisition at the deadline, the Ottawa Senators. I'm going to talk about who I think was their best fantasy performer. For me, it was Tim Stützle. 78 games played, 39 goals, 51 assists for 90 points, 228 shots on goal per game, 114 hits, 21 minutes and 16 seconds of time on ice. Just a shade under 4 minutes of power play time on ice and had 28 power play points. Stützle broke his career highs for everything this year, averaged about 3 shots on goal per game. Didn't get as many hits as he got last year, which he's still giving you over a hit per game. So that's fantastic, especially to go along with the shots. 49 blocks. You got to love this guy. And he beat out his power play points by 1 from last year. So even maybe some room to grow as far as power play points go. Jacob, who is your best fantasy performer from Ottawa this year?
Hands down, I'm going to go with the other Tkachuk, Brady Tkachuk. To me, similar to his brother, he's arguably one of the best all-around fantasy options, and I would say even slightly better than his brother. If you ask me, he gets a lot more peripheral coverage than Matthew does, but he's putting up similar points. He still had 40 goals. He had 83 points, 28 power play points, but he finished the year with 242 hits. That's just insane. Absolutely insane. Whether you're playing points or categories, he's someone that if you didn't have him in your lineup, you're crazy. So to me, Brady Tkachuk, grab him if you can, because he's going to do nothing but put up points and throw hits for the remainder of his career.
Yeah, he is fantastic for that. The Tkachuk brothers, putting in work this year. Love to see it. My biggest surprise from Ottawa this year was none other than the disappointing Cam Talbot. 36 games this year, only 17 wins, 2.93 goals against average, 898 save percentage. Yikes. No bueno. Talbot, he was supposed to come in and be a consistent veteran presence and sort of help the goaltending out. But unfortunately, he did not do that. So I'd stay away from him next year. I'd pick one of the other goalies. Just no. Jacob, who surprised you the most?
Yeah, Ottawa is definitely going to be on the goalie market in free agency this year, so I would also avoid Talbot. As far as my surprise player, I'm going to go with the rookie, Shane Pinto. He had a really hot start to the year, and he was a good fantasy option early on, and he tapered off a little bit, but it was still surprising what he had, finishing with the 20 goals. He was always a good depth option. He was get you a couple of peripheral looks here and there, and to me, he's got some really good potential on a team that's developing and growing. So look to him maybe in the later rounds as you draft next year, because he's going to have some value and he's going to have some opportunities to break into their top 6 in the next couple of years.
Absolutely. Pinto, he was good. He was good this year. I like that pick. A lot. Moving on, we're almost done. We got 2 teams left to go through. Jacob, the Detroit Red Wings. Who was your best performer from them this year?
It was no question for me. I got to say Big Mo Seider, Moritz Seider. He's just a massive defenseman that does everything. He had 207 hits, 190 block shots, and he still managed to put up 42 points. He's going to get more scoring production as Detroit continues to develop offensively. And he's always going to be that big physical defenseman that's playing both ends and just rocking everyone that he can find, whether it be with aggressive hits or with reverse hits. He's really living up to that Cronwall comparison that I've seen a few times, just dropping people left and right. So if you have Big Mo Sider, you are going to be in for a fun time as a fantasy owner.
Yeah, I mean, he's almost the master of the reverse hit. It's kind of crazy just watching him play. I swear half the hits he had in his rookie season were reverse hits. Just amazing to watch. And I mean, he didn't hit the point totals that he did last year, but I mean, those peripherals, like, you gotta love Moritz Seider. He's only going to get better. He got better in the second half after he was paired with Jake Wallman. Getting rid of boat anchors can help a player. Who would have known? He didn't match his shot on goal totals from his rookie season, but he had 56 more hits and he had 29 more blocks. Okay. And he didn't have as many power play points, but for a while there, Filip Hronek took over the power play from him. So that can kind of explain the drop in power play points. But I would try, if you can get Seider, if you can convince somebody, you might be able to buy low on him. And that would be an investment worth considering. My best fantasy performer from Detroit, I'm going to have to go with David Perron. I mean, the easy pick would be Larkin, but Perron for me is a fantastic pick. In 82 games, 24 goals, 32 assists for 56 points, 195 shots, 107 hits, great category coverage, which you love to see. 16 minutes and 55 seconds of time on ice per game, 3.5 minutes of power play time on ice per game, 22 power play points. And he had a 12.3 shooting percentage this year, 13% on average for his career. So he was right in his wheelhouse. I mean, Perron's he's just a good, solid player. They're going to need those veteran players in Detroit to help the young guys come up. And Perron, kind of stepped up at the end of the year, after Bertuzzi was traded and various different injuries and those sorts of things. So look for him to make an impact next year as well. Jacob, who is your biggest surprise in Detroit?
For me, it's goaltender, Billy Husso. And, I thought he was going to go into Detroit and, kind of stabilize their goaltending. And he really did. He still had all of the good habits that he had in St. Louis, but it was just unfortunate that he wasn't able to get up to the numbers that probably he wanted to or that Detroit wanted to. But I still think he was a good, fantasy surprise. He still managed 26 wins, and he added 4 shutouts on top of that. So, 4 shutouts on a team that struggled a bit defensively, that's a great asset to have. And that's something that's just going to get better as Detroit continues to get better. So Husso might be a solid late to mid-round pickup going into next year.
100%. And, just to be fair, they were a bit better defensively this year. Derek Lalonde sort of acknowledged that in his year-end presser, but they do have a ways to go. And one guy who struggled this year and was my biggest surprise for different reasons, Lucas Raymond. Disappointing in maybe the points aspect, but some positive markers to look at and be excited for growth next year. In 74 games played this year, 17 goals, 28 assists for 45 points, 134 shots, 43 hits. The peripherals and the points were down this year. Yes. The power play points were up and the power play time on ice was up. His shooting percentage was also 12.7%, and it was 12.5 last year. So he's right in his shooting percentage, but he shot less. So, and I think part of that was sort of adjusting to Derek Lalonde's defensive system and trying to focus more on that. I think with an off season of growth and working on his game, working on getting stronger, I think he's going to get more shots next year. I think he's going to get more goals, just under 17 and a half minutes of time on ice per game, about 2.5 minutes of power play time on ice per game. If Detroit can really lean into their power play a bit more and really have a number one unit that gets like 3.5 minutes average per game, and he can be on there on that first unit, I think he can really excel as almost a power play specialist, and that can really help get his point totals up. That's my guy for biggest surprise. And now the last team for the Atlantic, Montreal Canadiens. My best fantasy performer, Nick Suzuki, 82 games played. He had 26 goals, 40 assists for 66 points, 162 shots, 50 hits. He was just great this year. And what more can you say? Montreal didn't have a great season, but he did. So not a point per game, but as the people around him become more skilled, he's just gonna have more points. So Jacob, who was your top guy in Montreal?
Yeah, Montreal's going to have a lot of firepower up front in the next couple of years. So one of the biggest ones for me, Cole Caulfield. He, in my opinion, proved that his size really isn't going to affect his production at the NHL level. He threw up 26 goals and he only played half the season. So by season's end, he could have been pushing 40, maybe 45 goals. At that point, the assists will eventually come the more he plays. But I think he was their best overall performer. And if he played the whole year, I think he would have topped Suzuki.
Oh, 100%. He was just on fire. I'll talk about Cole Caulfield because surprise, he was my biggest surprise, for positive surprise. In his 46 games, 26 goals, 10 assists for 36 points, 158 shots, 18 hits. Yeah, he was feeling it this year. He was, when he did play, he averaged just over 18 minutes of time on ice per game, 3 minutes and 16 seconds of power play time on ice per game, 10 power play points in 46 games. You prorate that over the whole season, that's 20 power play points. That's still pretty decent. His shots on goal, last year in his 67 games, he was averaging 2.8 shots on goal per game. This year, 3.4. Love to see it. 16.5 shooting percentage. Seems a little high, but he is a shooter. He is a sniper. They generally have a shooting percentage that seems a bit high. So nothing to worry about there as far as regression. Maybe he regresses negatively, but over the course of a full season, he's going to beat his goal total from this year. His 26 goals beat his previous high of 23 goals from last year. Caulfield is the real deal.
Yeah, I mean, to me, he's probably one of the best sleeper picks going into next year. So if you can grab him in that kind of mid-late round again, he might even be available late rounds, depending on how people are valuing him or valuing the Canadiens' offense. So you can get some major offensive production out of somebody like him. But as far as my last surprise player, I'm going to talk about Mike Matheson, defender. He also played only about half the season. He played 48 games played, and he still managed 8 goals and 33 points. That's some great numbers out of a defenseman. And if he played the whole year, we'd be talking about him as one of the best overall fantasy defensemen for this year, in my opinion. So if you paid attention and you grabbed him off the waiver wire after he came back from injury and, was dealing with those issues, you got some great performance numbers just overall for late in the year. And I know I did because I grabbed him late myself, and he was a big reason I got some wins in the late parts of the weeks. So once Montreal gets completely healthy and gears up for next year, I think Matheson is going to be a good kind of mid-round pick as far as defensive options go for fantasy.
It's going to be really interesting to see what Montreal does on their blue line. If Matheson's the power play guy again, definitely pick him up. Worth at least a late round flyer on to at least have on your team, have on your bench, and just sort of see what happens with Montreal's power play. That's really going to be the key there. Is it going to be Matheson? Is it going to be Gooley? Is it going to be Barron? Is it going to be somebody they bring in? Is it going to be somebody who's in their system who comes out and just explodes? We will wait and see. That is all the time that we have for today. Next week, we will dive into our Metro Division recap, so please tune in for that discussion. You can follow the podcast on Twitter at THW Fantasy. I'm on Twitter at Caleb Scouting.
And I'm also on Twitter at Stroz67.
If you are watching on YouTube, be sure to like this video and subscribe to the Hockey Writers YouTube channel. If you are listening in podcast format, subscribe to the podcast. And please leave us a review on whatever platform you listen to. You've been listening to the Hockey Writers Fantasy Forecheck. Keep your stick on the ice, get pucks in deep, and give it 110%, eh? I'll see you next week.